What if I told you Napoleon, the conqueror of Europe, was once defeated by something as simple as a rabbit? It was the summer of 1807, a year that would forever be etched in the annals of history. The French Empire, under the iron grip of Napoleon Bonaparte, stood at its peak. The world trembled before him, and Europe was subdued beneath his colossal shadow. Yet, on a day like no other, amidst the great celebrations of his diplomatic triumph, a peculiar request echoed through the halls of the imperial palace. Napoleon, ever the lover of grandeur, sought a celebration unlike any other, a rabbit hunt that would be a symbol of his unmatched power. But fate, as it often does, had a far different plan in mind. The emperor, the conqueror of nations, was about to face an adversary unlike any he had encountered before. In the vast courtyard of the palace, a curious air of anticipation hung thick in the warm July breeze. The men of Napoleon's court, generals and nobles alike, eagerly prepared for what was promised to be a day of triumph. Alexander Berthier, Napoleon's trusted chief of staff, was tasked with organizing the hunt. His orders were simple: to procure the finest rabbits for the event. But in his ambition to impress the emperor, Berthier made an error. Instead of securing wild hares, he arranged for hundreds, perhaps thousands, of domesticated rabbits, all from local farmers. It was a decision that would soon unravel in the most unexpected way. As the hunt drew nearer, the preparations unfolded with meticulous detail. The morning air was crisp, and the scent of fresh earth mingled with the perfume of fine French wines that lined the tables for the elite. Cages, laden with the fluffy creatures, were neatly arranged, waiting to be released. The sunlight caught the gold braids on Napoleon's uniform as he stepped outside, his eyes gleaming with the promise of a victorious day. The horn sounded, echoing through the courtyard, signaling the beginning of the hunt. But as the cages opened, the unexpected happened. The rabbits, instead of fleeing in terror, dashed forward with surprising speed. They surged toward Napoleon, drawn not by fear, but by hunger. A sea of twitching noses, floppy ears, and soft fur descended upon the emperor. The ground seemed to ripple as the rabbits hopped forward in unison, their tiny paws pattering against the stone like a drumbeat of a growing storm. Napoleon stood frozen, his eyes widening in disbelief as the creatures swarmed around him. They climbed his legs, their teeth gnawing at the gold of his jacket, mistaking him for a provider of food. It was a moment of utter chaos, where the mighty conqueror of Europe found himself at the mercy of the smallest of foes. Napoleon's face, usually so composed and impervious to fear, now betrayed confusion and panic. The scene turned into a frenzy. Napoleon, his calm demeanor shattered, raised his riding crop in a futile attempt to fend off the relentless tide of rabbits. His generals, caught off guard, swung at the creatures with heavy sticks, but the rabbits were undeterred. They were swift and numerous, overtaking the battlefield with the ferocity of a storm. The emperor's composure wavered, his mind racing for a way to regain control, but the soft, squeaking army of bunnies was relentless. It was a sight that defied logic, an unstoppable force of nature overwhelming one of history's greatest tacticians, forcing him to retreat. Napoleon, his usually unwavering confidence now shaken, turned and sprinted toward his imperial carriage, his boots thudding heavily against the cobblestones. The rabbits, however, were faster than he anticipated. They swarmed, darting between his legs, climbing over his uniform with a desperate fervor. The emperor's generals, once proud military men, now found themselves in the absurd position of fending off rabbits with a sense of helplessness. The soft bodies of the creatures clung to their legs, their insistent gnawing and twitching filling the air with an eerie, almost mocking symphony. Napoleon's carriage awaited him, but even as he neared the door, the relentless bunnies followed, leaping at him with terrifying agility. A once proud and powerful emperor was now caught in an unforeseen struggle against an army of hungry rabbits. The imperial coachman, usually so calm in the face of danger, was now frantic, his hands trembling as he attempted to whip the horses into motion. The carriage door slammed open, but the swarm of rabbits had already reached him. Some had already managed to leap into the carriage before it could even begin to move. Their tiny paws skittered across the velvet seats, their fur brushing against the plush fabrics of imperial luxury. It was as if the rabbits had no fear of the emperor's mighty power, no respect for the fearsome reputation that preceded him. Instead, they had conquered him in the most surreal of ways. The sound of their claws scratching against the carriage's wooden panels mixed with Napoleon's frantic commands to his driver, who was powerless to escape the army of fury behind them. Napoleon's face turned a deep shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging with frustration. This was not the glorious hunt he had envisioned. The mighty Napoleon Bonaparte, the architect of the Napoleonic Wars, now found himself defeated by the most unexpected of adversaries. He attempted to shove the rabbits aside, his hands trembling with desperation as they clung to him, their tiny bodies wriggling beneath his touch. The horses bolted, pulling the carriage away at full speed, but even as the imperial coach sped away, the rabbits remained a formidable presence in the rear view. Some still clung to the wheels. Others followed in a frenzied chase, their small bodies becoming a blur of movement in the distance. The battle had been lost, not to soldiers or cannons, but to an army of hungry, fearless creatures. The day, once so filled with promise and celebration, had turned into one of the most bizarre spectacles ever witnessed. Napoleon sat in his carriage, his face drawn and weary, the weight of the absurdity of the situation pressing heavily on his shoulders. He could hear the distant sounds of the ongoing chaos in the courtyard. The triumphant cheers of his generals had long since turned into exasperated shouts as they tried, unsuccessfully, to regain control over the swarm of rabbits. The air, once filled with the scent of royal feasts and perfume, now carried the earthy scent of fresh grass and hay, as the echoes of the battle still reverberated in the distance. It was a far cry from the glory Napoleon had anticipated. In the back of his mind, questions lingered. How had this all gone so wrong? And how had it all slipped so suddenly from his grasp? As the carriage rumbled toward the safety of the palace gates, Napoleon's thoughts swirled in a vortex of confusion, embarrassment, and a strange sense of helplessness. His reputation, built on tactical genius and ruthless conquests, had been shattered by something as seemingly insignificant as a rabbit. The irony was not lost on him. The same strategy and precision that had brought him victory on battlefields across Europe had utterly failed against the simplest of creatures. The grandeur of his empire seemed almost laughable in the face of such an absurd defeat. And yet, as the carriage slowed, Napoleon's mind shifted from embarrassment to contemplation. This incident, this strange skirmish with an army of rabbits, would remain a secret between himself and the few who had witnessed it. Perhaps it would become nothing more than a footnote in the history of his reign. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it would be the one story that even time could not forget. The palace gates slammed shut behind Napoleon's carriage with a finality that echoed through the once jubilant courtyard. Inside, the emperor sat motionless, his eyes glazed over with the weight of the absurdity he had just endured. His generals slowly began to return, one by one, their faces flushed with frustration and disbelief. The once mighty hunt had turned into a comical disaster, the aftermath of which left every soldier, noble, and servant questioning the unlikeliness of the event. Napoleon, who had toppled empires and defeated the greatest armies of Europe, had been vanquished by the simplest of creatures, a swarm of rabbits. His mind raced, trying to grasp how something so trivial had undone his perfect image. And yet, beneath the frustration, there was an unsettling silence that filled the air. No one dared speak of it aloud, yet they all knew it would haunt them forever. Word of the bizarre hunt quickly spread throughout the ranks of Napoleon's army, whispered from soldier to soldier, from courtier to courtier. At first, it was met with laughter, an absurdity too wild to be true. But as the days passed, the whispers grew more frequent, more incredulous. How had the mighty Napoleon been defeated by such an inconceivable enemy? The more people thought about it, the more curious they became. Was it a sign? Had the emperor, who had never been stopped by anything before, finally met his match? The idea of Napoleon, the emperor who had crushed armies and conquered nations, being defeated by mere rabbits began to take on an almost mythical quality, turning the event into a legend that would be told for generations. No one knew for certain if it was a sign of fate or simply an unbelievable misstep, but in the months and years to come, the tale would only grow more strange and fantastical. As time went on, the memory of the rabbit hunt began to fade into the shadows of Napoleon's larger-than-life legacy. Yet, in certain corners of Europe, the tale lingered. It became a symbol of the unexpected nature of power, how even the most formidable rulers could be brought low by forces they never anticipated. In taverns and royal courts alike, the story was passed on, sometimes as a cautionary tale, sometimes as a humorous anecdote. The image of Napoleon, fleeing from an army of bunnies, became a strange symbol of the absurdity that sometimes lurks behind even the grandest of plans. It was a humbling reminder that not even the greatest strategist could predict every variable in life. And so, as Napoleon's empire crumbled and his reign came to an end, the tale of the rabbit hunt survived, forever intertwined with the legend of the emperor who once conquered all of Europe, but could not escape the hunger of a rabbit. The years rolled on, and the world moved forward, but for those who had witnessed the legendary hunt, the memory remained vivid. Some would chuckle nervously whenever the emperor's name was mentioned, an awkward pause settling over the room as they recalled the strange and baffling day when Napoleon's empire was brought to its knees by something so simple. It was a story that defied logic, one that people couldn't help but tell again and again, not just because it was funny, but because it was so deeply perplexing. What had driven those rabbits to act so fearlessly? Was it fate, divine irony, or something more sinister at play? As the years wore on, the tale evolved, taking on an air of mystery. The idea of Napoleon's defeat by such an ordinary foe began to feel less like a historical incident and more like a riddle that history itself had left unsolved. In the end, the story of Napoleon and the rabbits would become an enigma, a footnote in history that no one could quite explain. Some said it was a strange omen, a reminder that even the greatest leaders could not control every element of their destiny. Others believed it was simply the result of a miscalculation, a story of hubris and pride gone awry. Yet, whatever the reason, the tale of the rabbit hunt would live on, whispered by the firesides of Europe for centuries to come. It served as a haunting reminder that no matter how powerful one might be, the world is full of unpredictable forces, and sometimes it is the most unexpected enemy that brings even the mightiest of men to their knees.